Welcome to the
Club Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Welcome to another episode of the Club Dub Football Podcast. This week, with no NFL games to talk about, we're going to change our format slightly. And with the Super Bowl still a week away, we're going to focus on news that affects a number of the other 30 teams in the NFL who aren't preparing for the biggest game of the year. In particular, we're going to look at the 7 teams who've made coaching changes since the end of the regular season. All of those teams had one thing in common, namely that they ended with losing records. And we're going to pick out the coaching changes that we think will make the biggest difference and tell you who we think will be spending more of their time next season in Club Dub.
Elvis! Elvis! Hey, Elvis!
I'm Rob Rose, and I'm now going to be joined by JB, PB, and Aldrin as normal to talk through this coaching carousel. So, on with the show. So, welcome, gents.
Hello.
And we are here to pull out the highlights from 7 coaching changes. And let me give you the runners and riders before we kick off. So our 7 coaching changes since the end of the regular season are the Jacksonville Jaguars, who take Urban Meyer. The Jets take Robert Saleh. The Falcons take Arthur Smith from the Tennessee Titans. The Chargers landed on Brandon Staley. The Philadelphia Eagles, Nick Sirianni. And very recently, the Texans add David Culley. Last but by no means least, the Detroit Lions go for Dan Campbell.
I think you mean Jeff Bridges. Looks like the dude himself from the Big Lebowski, doesn't he? Even sounds like him.
We'll add Rob can add the laughs there for you.
Jeez.
I have selected the Houston Texans. To be fair to the Texans, it's not a fantastic setup. I think talking about some of the less positive points is something that we need to acknowledge. The Texans in the draft this year don't pick until pick 67 in the 3rd round. So that's no first and no second. They have hired a head coach who, with over, I think, 4 decades of experience, nearly first started coaching in 1978 as the running backs coach for Austin Peay University. He's worked under Andy Reid. He's worked under John Harbaugh, obviously, in Baltimore. He's got a wealth of experience, which I think is something that the Texans are going to need. The Texans last year talked about the culture of the club. They talked about changing that and bringing it in. And I think it starts with the experience of a head coach like David Culley. It starts with the experience of success that the GM they've bought, Nick Caesaro, from New England. The obvious key talking point right now is franchise quarterback Deshaun Watson. I think take Watson away from that club and you have a very, very, very drastically different setup. It's something that you would want that 1st round pick to have in the bag ready to pick up his replacement. But you can't deny the talent of a lot of the pieces they've got. Brandon Cooks, Will Fuller, for all of their difficulties in staying fit and staying on the field, still give you game-changing plays when you need them. On the defensive side of the ball, you've got Benardrick McKinney and you've got J.J. Watt. And again, the injuries he's faced, you can never count out J.J. Watt from being a difference maker. The real thing that I have in mind for putting the Texans forward here, basically, they're at the very bottom. The only way is up, baby. I think you're set up for a challenge, but you're set up in the perfect kind of position to be able to bring in who you want, bring in what you need. We're talking about lack of draft picks, but Deshaun Watson, if they do end up trading him, is going to command something akin to the Herschel Walker trade. And historically, you look at how the Herschel Walker trade impacted the Dallas Cowboys. If they can pull off something like that and bring in that level of player in 2-3 seasons time, we could be talking about the Houston Texans as one of the best teams in the league, and everyone is thinking, well, that kind of came out of nowhere.
So a few things from me, because there's a lot to chew over with the Texans. I mean, I think one of the things in the announcement when they hired David Culley was that he's the kind of coach that players love. And you kind of felt that with everything rumbling in the background that was something that they were going to look to address. The only problem I guess I have is that even if you add in a David Culley and you said, so much of the culture of a football team starts with the head coach, I just wonder if it does with the Texans. When Deshaun Watson's going to ask for a trade, he's sitting in somebody's office. And at the time, it wasn't David Culley. There's a number of people that are leading and guiding that organization that players don't seem to trust anymore. And do you know what? You kind of make an interesting point, however, about with the Texans, the only way is up. And again, if I was going to look at a silver lining of all the years to not have draft picks, and I mean, like you say, to have 1, 2 in the first 100 selections, maybe this year is the year to do it. With the cap being so different next year, with so many teams having to cut so many players and make so many savings, maybe free agency and maybe the moving and the shaking that teams will be able to do this offseason could be, just what the Texans need, a reboot that they never thought they'd be able to achieve. As you say, I mean, I'm of the view that Deshaun Watson is, if that trade was to happen, that would be meteoric. I mean, we've seen elite quarterbacks move before, but there's always been a reason. If you look at Peyton Manning, if you look at Drew Brees, even going back that far, leaving, they've left in circumstances where they're coming off injury. Nobody quite knows what's coming back to a starting lineup with that type of player. Deshaun Watson is a bona fide top 5 quarterback in the NFL, hands down. This guy is healthy. This guy has his best years ahead of him. He is an absolute superstar. And Herschel Walker is I guess, a comparison of sorts. But we're talking about a running back in a sport where the quarterback makes the biggest difference. And, you're right. I think they get all of those picks they're missing back and then some if they traded him away. But it does seem to me to be a really interesting seesaw. If they can keep him, I think their chances are better, because with all of those picks, you could still be waiting 25 years, 30 years to get someone like Deshaun Watson back in the building.
I think you're making a good point about the importance of the quarterback position. And one of the things we have discussed on the podcast and off it is the quarterback merry-go-round that we're about to see. We are talking about Matt Stafford is going to be available to people. Alex Smith, by the sounds of it, is potentially not going to return to the Washington football team. He might be available. Jimmy G is being talked about as being available because the 49ers are evaluating the quarterback position. Sean McVay isn't entirely sold on Jared Goff anymore, and we might have a competitive competition between Goff and Wolford in training camp. The Steelers today have talked about, well, we'd love to have Ben Roethlisberger back if there's a way to work it out. That's 5-6 off the top of my head that we are potentially talking about that could be available. Kirk Cousins, another one. So Deshaun Watson is not someone out of that list that I would necessarily say, oh yeah, I'd absolutely take Alex Smith instead. I think in the same way that we talked about Aaron Rodgers on last week's preview show, Deshaun Watson is the straw that stirs every single drink in that Texans stadium. And you cannot replace that easily. If you can set up a good team around someone, if you put Matthew Stafford, as he was as the first one, I think the primary one that's available, put him in that Texans team, in that Texans offense, and I think you've got something that you could still win football games with.
That's a really good point. But I think when we were talking before, the one thing for me, when Rob said you get all those picks back, I think that for me is the big difference maker, because unlike that Walker trade, the Texans have got nothing this year anyway. So getting a first round pick is great, and potentially landing spots are being talked at, like the Jets, for instance. So you could get the second pick this year, but you're only getting a pick back for what you've already lost. You're not adding capital to what you already have. I think it's a good point. There's so many quarterbacks available now. If they were to lose Deshaun Watson, and you're going to get a king's ransom for him, whatever happens, you're going to get first round picks galore. You can pick up a serviceable quarterback such as Cousins or somebody of that ilk, that you can bring in and who can start immediately. My only concern for the Texans is, and endemic from that whole organization, but I just don't think a new coach with no head coaching experience, potentially no quarterback going into early weeks of the off season or what have you, just don't see them bouncing back. If anything, I can see this year being an absolute down year, even worse than they've experienced this year. You lose Watson. Who wants to go to the Texans? Do you know what I mean? When you lose that iconic quarterback, who wants to go there?
I'm kind of the opposite view in a way to you there, I think. I mean, there's no argument from me. I mean, Deshaun Watson is a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. If not top 3, he's easily up there. And I think you surround him with some better parts than he's had in Houston, then, he's a potential Super Bowl winning quarterback. But for the Texans right now, I don't know if they can get 2 or 3 first round picks, considering that they traded so much away, and really build from the bottom up, which is arguably what the new GM and the new head coach might want to do, then I think that almost might be the better option for them. So if they can get the King's ransom that they want, they've already, whoever wants to trade for him has already got a bit of buying power in their pocket, knowing that he wants out. But, if someone is willing to pay what the Texans want for him, so 2 or 3 first round picks, for example, and depending on what team you look at the Jets, for example, would they offer Darnold and a couple of first round picks? It starts to look a little bit rosier for the Texans. They're obviously not going to have a quarterback of an equivalent standing as Deshaun Watson, but by taking him away and building up some other areas, does that actually work better for them as a team?
See, now for me, there's 2 quick points to pick up on. Aldrin, you made a point about will quarterbacks want to go there? Will a lot of players want to go there with everything that feels like it's going on? Again, the silver lining, and I think it's only a silver lining for the Texans, is remember a trade is a trade. If you get traded, if you're Matthew Stafford and the Detroit Lions trade you to the Houston Texans, you get no say at all where you go. As much as we've said there are quarterbacks available, and JB, you just gave a huge list, but you did miss one, which is Dak Prescott. And if you imagine a scenario where, say, a Deshaun Watson's out, Dak Prescott's in, I think those are similar quarterbacks. I think I'd give Watson the edge, but I think they're, again, elite level, top tier quarterbacks we're talking about. And also, if they were to trade away Deshaun Watson, they trade away a monster contract they've just given him as well. It will free up the kind of money to maybe go out and be aggressive in free agency. But I think I'd probably just come back round to, have we seen anything to say that we would trust this organization with draft picks? We would trust this organization with salary cap space? Where are the green shoots here? Because I still think you could give them as much rope as they need and they could just simply end up hanging themselves with it.
The counter that I have in my head to those kinds of things is looking at another AFC South team in recent years, and that's the Tennessee Titans. I don't want to dismiss them as a joke, but they have been an organization that has had questions from the top down. They hired Mike Vrabel in 2018. And what Vrabel came in and did was rebuild the team, rebuild the organization, and give them an identity. From 2019, they ran behind Derrick Henry. But the thing to consider that I think a lot of people forget is Derrick Henry was drafted in 2016. And all of a sudden, it was Vrabel that potentially unlocked what the Titans were going to do. The Titans have also been motivated by the insertion of Ryan Tannehill as their quarterback. And we've talked about this. We talked about this, I think, when we watched the wild card game. Who expected Ryan Tannehill to go to the Titans and do what he did? It was just the perfect marriage of a player who needed a scheme that supported what he was good at doing and needed that opportunity to prove that he could do it. So when we talk about who's going to go to the Texans, who's going to be the figure, the Texans have it in them to be the next Titans. They're talking about, I think, retaining the offensive coordinator, but doing something with Josh McCown, which I think is great, because one of the things they have talked about frequently with Josh McCown as a backup quarterback is he's like another coach that's there. You think about how many years he's been in the league, how many teams he's played for, how much experience he has. They're talking about bringing Lovie Smith in as the defensive coordinator. And for as much as you can say about his successes and failings as a head coach, you can't argue with his successes on the defensive side of the ball.
I mean, I almost want to refer this back to the Patriots historically. The Titans are in the Texans division. One of the things that's not really in the Texans' favor is that this Titans team that, as you said, has been completely, reborn and looks like a perennial playoff team, along with a lot of other pretty talented AFC teams are going to be rolling into Texas, pretty much every other week for those divisional games. And I think we've seen with what the Patriots did to the other teams in their division for the best part of 2 decades, that isn't always a recipe for those struggling franchises to bounce back. JB, do you see the Texans in 2021 ending the regular season with a winning record?
Yes.
So you're putting the Texans in club dub for 2021. PB, how do you feel about it?
No chance. They're not going to make the playoffs next year. Arguably, will they make the playoffs the year after? I don't know. I just can't see it. I think they were poor at the start of this season. I think they kind of got better and got into it in some close games, but I just don't see, and especially if they trade Watson away, I just don't see that they've got enough there and a good enough coaching appointment to really turn it around there. I just think the vibe around the whole place is bad at the moment. I think they're going to miss the playoffs again next year.
Aldrin?
No, not for me either. I think, like you said, give them enough rope, they'll hang themselves again.
Yeah, I think I've probably got them feeling closer to next year's first overall pick than they are to playoff football. So with 1 down, that means 3 to go. And I'm handed over to you, Aldrin, to talk to us about your choice.
Mine is one of the most intriguing ones, I think, the Jacksonville Jaguars. One of the most intriguing franchises, certainly in terms of the options that they've got this year. And I really do think that's one of the most important things to talk about in terms of that head coach hire to start with. I think this year the Jags have got 11 picks, 4 of which are in the first 2 rounds. And obviously the crucial one being the number 1 pick in the draft, which we all know is more than likely going to be Trevor Lawrence, is the main reason why they have lured Urban Meyer to be the coach this year. And I think that's a real key point for me, just because Meyer's had interest at NFL level for a number of years. He's had so much success at collegiate level, 3-time Div 1 national champions, twice at Florida, once at Ohio State, great success at the college level, and always kind of flirted with the NFL, but never taken a role, never been given a role necessarily. So he brings a lot of intrigue is the word, I think, because it's an intriguing one to see how the Jacksonville Jaguars do. For me, it's a very sensible appointment. I think the marriage between Urban Meyer and that Trevor Lawrence presumptive number 1 pick is going to be really interesting. Obviously, that's what has drawn Meyer to the role, but also I think that will hopefully excite Lawrence and give him some confidence that he's going to go into an organization that is on the up. The big thing with Urban Meyer is he's proven program builder. He did it at Florida. He's done it at Ohio. And that is exactly what this Jacksonville Jaguars team needs. They need a complete rebuild almost. I was going through their roster and thinking, where do they need help this year? And I think there's so many spots. You've got, obviously, they've not had a franchise quarterback in decades, and I think they're going to get one of the most exciting ones. I think Lawrence has been talked about as a number 1 draft pick since even before high school. He's been kind of teed up as that top level quarterback prospect, and certainly from what I've seen of him at Clemson the last couple of years, he's done absolutely nothing to dispel that. He's looked exceptional. I know he didn't look great in that last game against Ohio State when Justin Fields arguably outplayed him, but he's tall, he's athletic, he gets the ball out fast, he's got good pocket awareness, he's exciting. So I think that brings that team up leaps and bounds to begin with, but then they've still got problems at cornerback, defensive tackle, safety, D-end, tight end. I think at the minute you've got Tyler Eifert as their tight end number 1. So, they're going to have to find options there. But for me, there's so much buzz about the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think so many picks, so much cap room, an exciting not young coach, but new coach to the NFL. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
So a quick question from me. You talk about a program builder, and I guess we've got what Matt Rule a year ago coming into the Panthers was kind of a similar vision and a kind of similar narrative. Do you see any eventuality where the Jaguars either don't take Lawrence? Does Fields even come into the equation, or end up trading away that first overall pick? But there's going to be a lot of other teams, like we said, who very much like Trevor Lawrence running out on their field, for week 1. If you're looking at a long-term project, do you see any way at all they'd trade that away?
Not in a million years. I don't, on a personal level. And I think just the talk that's come out of Shad Khan, in terms of, we need a franchise quarterback. All of that build-up was way before that Clemson-Ohio State game. I think we all know that Lawrence is the number one draft pick, and he's been touted as such for the last few years. And I don't see the reason I kind of called it out early doors is I think the reason that Urban Meyer is there is because they have the number one pick and can take Trevor Lawrence.
I agree. I think the number one pick by default makes the Jacksonville Jaguars one of the destinations to watch and one of the setups to watch as we go forward. I think, I would say, what I've had in my mind, though, ever since you started talking was about how Lawrence is one of the best prospects we've seen in years, one of the best in, let's say, a decade or something like that. That was how everybody talked about Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck went to the Colts, and what happened? They broke him because the team was not set up for success around him. The offensive line was neglected. The defense wasn't built upon. And eventually it just got to the point where he said, I've had enough. I'm out. Good luck, everybody. And it's only in recent years with the work of Chris Ballard and I think the work of Frank Reich that the Colts have been able to overcome that. Picking Trevor Lawrence at number one is such an obvious thing. Like everybody must see that happening. It should be the only guaranteed thing in the draft. The key for the Jags, the key for Meyer and the staff he built around him are, right, how do we make sure that we get this guy set? Looking at the Jags roster, there are some points they're going to need to expand upon. So of their starting wide receivers, DJ Chark is the only one I think that's still under contract for next year. So they're going to need some wide receiver help.
They've got Laviska Shenault as well. They drafted him last year. He looked, I wouldn't say elite, but he looked very good after the catch and, looks like a bona fide wide receiver 1 or 2. And I think the thing with the Jags is they've got a lot of holes, but they've also got a lot of bright spots. They stumbled across Robinson at running back this year, who's looked like a real top level running back, can play that 3-down role. They've got DJ Chark and Laviska Shenault at wide out, and they look pretty exciting, and certainly with a more elite quarterback, let's say, than the kind of merry-go-round / circus that they've had this year. On defense, they've got some real exciting players that they drafted last year and played a hell of a lot of snaps. So I do think there's optimism there. I agree. I do think they've got a lot of holes to fill, but with 11 picks and 73 million in cap room, I think with somebody like Meyer who will want to build and who will know what kind of direction he wants to take that team and knows where the gaps are. You don't have to be a genius to see the spaces that they have at cornerback, safety. But with that number of picks and with that number of cap room number, I don't even think the Jags can mess it up this year.
Do you think free agents are going to want to go into that environment though? They've got a head coach, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Urban Meyer's coached in the NFL before. So a rookie head coach, albeit, he's a lot older than a normal rookie head coach. He's had great success in the college game, but we don't know how that's going to come across into the NFL. There's arguably cultural issues with the Jags as well. I mean, a number of the players, so Ramsey, for example, Fournette, wanted to leave town. I don't know what the situation's like in the locker room there at the moment, but they won one game this year. So you'd say it's not a winning culture at least. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to come in and is going to be a big boost to them, but they're going to need to put some parts around him. And in addition to that, they're going to need to put some people in there with a winning mentality. You can see with a number of teams around the league, when you put somebody in who's got that winning mentality, who's been there before, who's done it before, the impact that can have. And I think the Jags, in addition to all their cap space, in addition to having the number one pick, they're going to have to look to bring that in free agency. And, it's going to be interesting to see how much of an attractive prospect that is.
I think the addition I'd have to that, and again, it's kind of the same silver lining as I said with the Texans. They've got cap room in an off season where no one has cap room. There is not enough money to go around, and there will be, talented players who are not going to sit out 2021, and they're going to have the phone ring and have their agent pretty excited about the fact that the Jacksonville Jaguars, one of the few teams that can afford to pay them properly, are interested.
Yeah, and I know we touched on that winning mentality, but I think somebody like Trevor Lawrence coming in, he's used to playing in championship games. Urban Meyer's used to winning them. So, I think those two at the head of your organization, really, they create that excitement and they create that winning mentality.
There's no guarantees about Lawrence either. I mean, he looks like an absolute stud. And, you would assume he's going to come in and play really well and really lift that team up. But, he could come in and look like a Ryan Leaf or a Christian Hackenberg or...
I don't disagree, but those are far fewer than, when you hear Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck touted as that kind of caliber of quarterback coming out of college, and then they absolutely live up to that.
I think Phil's right. If Blake Bortles can't make it in Jacksonville, who can? So let's go around the room then. So Aldrin, this was your shout. So I'm working on the assumption that what you're about to tell us about the Jags is you see them in Club Dub in 2021.
Yep, definitely. Certainly way more than the Texans, obviously same division. So yeah, I can see them being really exciting and making a push like they did the other season.
PB?
It's a tough one. I think they've got a better chance than the Texans do. I think if you were asking me who's more likely to make the playoffs out of the Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'd absolutely have to say the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I think if you look at their division, there were two playoff teams in that division this year, the Colts and the Titans, and I can't see the Jags overtaking either of those teams. So no, for me, they're not a playoff team next year.
JB?
I am also going to say no. I don't think the Jags are there yet. I think we are a year or two away from seeing that kind of success.
And I'll even it up then, Aldrin, I'm with you. In a year where there's so much talent out there and they've got money to spend, I'd rather be in the Jaguars' shoes than maybe a Colts or Titans. I think they could do it. PB, talk to me about the coaching change that you think puts a team in Club Dub.
I'll be talking about the Chargers hiring of Brandon Staley as head coach, so former Rams defensive coordinator. Hopefully, you'd think it should be a relatively easy transition for him, seeing as how his new team shares brand new SoFi Stadium with his old team. But on announcing the signing, General Manager Tom Telesco talked about Staley possessing a tremendous football mind, but also his ability to tailor and communicate his concepts to his players. And I think that's important. For a new head coach, you want to be able to easily communicate and get across to your players the new schemes that you're putting in place. At 38, he's another youthful head coach. And I'm sure the Chargers are going to hope for a similar effect that the Rams have seen since appointing Sean McVay. And I can see that with this kind of hiring. Sean McVay, you'd argue, was probably more of an offensive appointment than Staley is for the Chargers. But I think it's a similar kettle of fish. He's a young guy that, being able to relate to the players that are there. So he was with the Rams for only one season, but he coordinated the league's number one defense in terms of scoring, pass defense, and total defense this season. A number of their players had career highs in sacks. So he's coming off the back of a successful season. Although the Rams lost in the divisional round, he certainly comes with, albeit only one season, but a good potential record. Personally, I think the Chargers were probably the most or one of the most attractive teams with a head coaching vacancy this offseason. They've got a stud quarterback who broke rookie records. I think I would arguably say that he has emerged as the leading quarterback of his draft class over Tua Tagovailoa and Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow obviously unfortunately got hurt, even before then. I think as soon as he came into the team, Justin Herbert was looking phenomenal. And the Chargers were hampered with significant injuries on their D this year. In particular, I think Derwin James missed the whole season. So, they were missing big players for some key times. And if you look at their offense as well, they've got Keenan Allen. He's a clear number one receiver. I don't think there's any argument about that. Hunter Henry is another strong player for them at tight end. And as we've already mentioned, Justin Herbert looks like an absolute superstar. In some markets, he's the smart money to be MVP next year. We talk about them as not being a playoff team this year, but if you look at their record, they were 7-9. But they played a lot of close games and a better decision here or there, and they could have been a playoff team. So just taking a look at their 9 losses, 7 of them were one-score games. 2 of those went to overtime, and they were against the Chiefs and the Saints, 2 of the top teams in the regular season. And there were only 2-score losses or more were against the Bills, which was by 10 points, who made the conference championships. And, an absolute anomaly, a complete blowout 45-0 against the Patriots. So
your point is exactly bang on. And it's why, when I was thinking about, which coaching changes make the biggest difference, the Chargers are right up there for me as well, because they're so close already. Like you said, they're really close. Little details in some of those games, and it's completely different. Clock management was abysmal from the Chargers, and that's what led to some of those close losses. Like you say, injuries on defense doesn't help. Derwin James is a real exciting defensive talent and, missing for a lot of the past couple of seasons. But I do think that, Staley coming in, if he just improves that defense a little bit and makes slightly smarter decisions, then, what do you say, 7 and 9, they quite quickly jump up to being the reverse of that or better. I think Herbert is phenomenal. I called it early doors and said that I thought he was the best quarterback of the class. He can make all the throws. He's athletic. I think if they get that run game just that little bit better, they were predictable under Lynn. And I think somebody like Eckler can be exciting, and they've got players in and around him that can drive that run game on. So bang on points. And I do think they'll be a really exciting team this year.
And we can't overestimate how poor their special teams were this year. They were historically bad. It was the third worst unit ever tracked. That tells a story. And part of that is down to decision making. They made some stupid decisions in games when it came to special teams. But, that's a quick fix. And if you can improve your special teams, even a little bit, if they improve their special teams 50% on where they were this year, a lot of those 3-point, 4-point, 5-point games that they lost will quickly turn around into wins. So
I think Eckler has kind of ridden as their number one back for the last 2 seasons. But personally, I think he fits more that Darren Sproles, Danny Woodhead role that the Chargers have used historically, of kind of your smaller satellite back who can sort of come in for third downs, can play a role in the passing game. He doesn't necessarily have the size that you'd want for someone running between the tackles. So I think it is going to be a key to establish that and use that to help Herbert out and stop putting the game on his shoulders. Because I think one of the reasons he had such an excellent historic rookie season, like we said, is he kind of had to. He had to throw the ball a lot. He had to make those decisions. It's a sign of his talent and his skill that he did, but he was put in that position because he didn't really have a choice not to. The other consideration is, I think the roster is very much a double-edged sword. Herbert, Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen, we've talked about Eckler. I think Joshua Kelly, I think their rookie from this year, he was fantastic as well. They've got really good pieces. However, on the other side of that, they also have a lot of free agents at the moment that they're going to need to retain. Melvin Ingram, Hunter Henry, Denzel Perryman, to name a couple.
So if I take the points raised and just add my 2 pennies worth, I think on the one hand, you're all right. I think we're talking about a playoff team in terms of talent, and the head coach lost his job because they never made it there. But I also think that you guys have pinpointed real issues on ultimately offense and special teams, and they've hired a defensive head coach. That would be to some degree my concern. Now, I kind of see what you mean about what a great year he had last year. And, when he came in, I think there was an awful lot of, raised eyebrows really at such an inexperienced coach, even at coordinator level, coming in to basically lead that unit for the Rams. Even though I maybe have some kind of concern about a defensive coach being chosen, the talent there is just, it is just so good. Herbert, you guys have mentioned, I won't go any further, but Keenan Allen, that guy is such a safe pair of hands for a young quarterback. I'm with you, Aldrin. I think when it comes to Eckler at running back, I think the problem is just they were too predictable. I think if you're running first down every time Eckler off tackle, that's going to do nothing. I think, JB, you made the point about the fact he might be best used. I wouldn't necessarily agree with you used less, as a third down back, but maybe split more evenly the time when he carries the ball and has the ball thrown to him. I think out the backfield, he's definitely got that about him.
Yeah, the reason I picked them is because I think they were the most attractive proposition in terms of a head coaching vacancy this year. And I think, they've made one of the most exciting appointments in terms of a young guy who's just run the best defense in the league this year. So, it's a really interesting prospect, and I think it's going to be exciting to watch.
So, PB, I'm going to throw over to you. And as you were nominating them, I'm guessing that you're going to tell us that you are putting the LA Chargers into Club Dub.
Yeah, look, I think the Chargers are probably set better now than they were at this time last off-season when there was a fair bit of buzz about them being on Hard Knocks. It was unfortunate circumstances for Tyrod Taylor to be injured and Herbert to come in, but actually I think that's worked in their favour. He's looked incredible this year, and he'll be, a year better off than he would have been if he sat behind Taylor all year.
Rolling around the room then. Aldrin, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with Phil on this one. I think almost any coach could have come in and made that team exciting, and with Herbert at the helm, they're on their way up. So yeah, absolutely for me, definitely on the upside.
And JB?
Yeah, 3 for 3. I absolutely think the Chargers have got it in them to do so much better.
Yeah, I think I'll make it 4 for 4. I think ultimately playoff talent already. The head coach was probably the limiting factor. So there you go. The Chargers, the first team to get a clean sweep across the group. So now it rolls over to me, and I was last to pick my team and was amazed that when I looked at the options still available to talk about for key comeback years, I was left with the opportunity to talk about the New York Jets. So if I was to take the best bits, the highlights, the most important factors from your arguments about the Chargers, about the Texans, and about the Jaguars, you're about to hear a lot of similar themes. If I talk about the Jets, well, let's talk about the fact that they are, again, absolutely loaded with draft capital this year, picking 6 times in the top 98 picks. That includes 2 picks in the first round, obviously that high pick at 34 in the second round, and again 2 in the third. But if you start to look at the fact that they've got these draft picks, that's really only the tip of the iceberg, because those draft picks might be added to should they decide to move on from Sam Darnold. And if I think about the quarterback questions that some of these other franchises we've talked about on this pod have got, I think Sam Darnold is among the more interesting, because actually I don't think the Jets are necessarily better off or worse off with him or without him. I really can see a route to success whichever way they go. So let's start firstly with Sam Darnold staying a New York Jet and what they can do. So it's interesting you guys are talking about Joe Burrow, the draft class from last year with Tua, and obviously, we've already talked about what a difference it made for the Chargers. What if I told you that Sam Darnold at 23 years old, a full year younger than Joe Burrow, despite the fact he's had longer in the league? So Darnold, although he's been in a very difficult position, I'm not sure anyone really enjoys the season that the Jets have just had. We're talking about a guy who has flashed enough talent and has league experience that I think gives him an advantage over a Burrow or a Tua, for example, why I picked them out specifically. Now add the fact that even though, like the Chargers, we're looking at a team that have brought in a defensive-minded head coach in Salah, and I'll come back to his appointment and why I think that's such a plus. We're looking at an OC in Mike LaFleur that I think, again, is very, very well thought of and held in very high regard. An absolutely brilliant coup to get him in the building. You then look at who Salah's been able to bring with him from the 49ers, and the big one is Miles Austin, kind of the famous near journeyman wide receiver that recently has been head of offensive quality over in San Francisco. And you look at what he was able to do with a makeshift, almost like a really revolving door of wide receivers that came in and out of the 49ers starting lineup last season. I think he's a guy moving to wide receiver coach now in New York who could make a difference. A lot of people look at Joe Douglas and think he's part of the old guard. The fact that, not much more than 12 months ago, they brought in Joe Douglas at GM, I think that can be seen as another positive, because Joe Douglas is not the kind of person who makes swift decisions. I mean, we've seen that by the fact he kind of rode out what was a horrendous season last season with Adam Gase, but he wasn't, emotive or emotionally stuck with that, and he saw that process through to its conclusion. And then, like I say, add to the fact they've got these huge number of draft picks, add to the fact that they've got $63 million of cap space. So when you were talking about the Jags at 73, Aldrin, we're talking about a team that are not far behind at all here. I think the Jets have the best of everything. I mean, imagine a world where Sam Darnold is traded away. I think those 6 picks in the top 98 probably become 8, 9, if they end up taking 2s and 3s, possibly even arguably 10. If you're in a rebuild position, well, which route do you want to take? You've got a quarterback that's proven good enough to be a bona fide starter, and if he was traded away, I think would be a bona fide starter somewhere else in week one. You've got the ability to add quality players in what is looking a pretty good draft. And remember, of these 6 picks in the top 98, one of them's at 2. You know, if you've got a team who really like the look of somebody, and whether it's Fields or whether it's, you know, one of the other highly touted prospects, you don't need an awful lot to go right for you as the New York Jets for that phone to ring and for you to end up with even more capital in your pocket. So in other examples that we've talked about, I've said that capital isn't always a recipe for success. You know, I said about the Texans, and it ultimately depends on how you use it. So let's come back round to the appointment of Saleh as head coach. When he did his presser, he made a quote about the fact that he wanted the team to play fast, to be hungry, you know, and he wanted to bring youth into the team. You know, thinking about it again, almost like the long-term project we've heard you guys talk about with Meyer in Jacksonville, for example. But the thing that stands out there when you talk about young, hungry, and fast as your key 3 points, that means he's going to simplify one of the more convoluted and ineffective playbooks in the NFL that Gaze was rolling out for, 17 weeks last season. And I think that alone makes a difference. That I think in New York, you were in a big media market. We talked about Sean McVay, didn't we, in LA, and that would be another. You need to be a press-friendly face. And Saleh, a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve, bounces up and down on the sideline, absolutely gets everyone around him going. I think he's just such a brilliant fit for that organization. I mean, we talk a lot, and it's mentioned so much when people talk about the NFL, that when you hire a head coach, they often look for whatever their previous head coach, the departing head coach, didn't have. You hire the opposite. You hire their antidote almost. Well, Adam Gaze, that lethargy, that dull nature, that defensive nature that he had is gone. And it just feels like in that appointment alone, you have just breathed new life into the New York Jets. And I think, in any other time in the last 20 years, I'd have said they'll be chasing the Patriots the same way I suppose the Chargers will be chasing the Chiefs, but not this year. I can absolutely see the Jets going from zero to hero and being, division winners, running people like the Bills close. The Dolphins, I'd probably think, are another team like the Jets who go in with a lot of high hopes. But I can absolutely see the Jets making playoff football next season.
I think your points there on Saleh and kind of the impact that he's going to have are probably the biggest thing to talk about here. I think your point about Sam Darnold is probably second on that list, and we might come back to that. Talking about Saleh's energy, last season, so not season just gone, the season before, when it looked like Saleh was going to be hired then, there were there was video footage of him running the stairs in the stadiums to get into that kind of mindset of the competition. We earlier on, we talked a lot about Mike Vrabel at the Titans and the fact that if ever there was a retired player, now coach, who would still have it in him to put the pads on and give you a couple of snaps, it's Vrabel. Vrabel looked like he would absolutely run through a wall for his players. And I think Saleh is going to be that same kind of figure for the Jets. Those Jets wins that came last season, you saw in how the Jets behaved, were wins for themselves. They were not necessarily playing for the win. They weren't necessarily playing for not to be last. They weren't playing for the coaching staff. You could see from the interaction with the players that a lot of it was they were playing to the man next to them. And I think if Saleh can come in and capitalize on that heart that the Jets have shown, then I think they'll be incredibly successful.
I was just going to touch on Rob's point about Sam Darnold, and I think it's really interesting that, as Rob said, are they better with or without him? You probably don't even know. But I do think it's something that would have been taken completely out of the equation if they hadn't shot themselves in the foot and won those couple of games towards the end of the season. I think it's a completely different conversation if they have the number 1 pick. Now, they have the number 2 pick, and that basically gives that's almost, in my mind, that's when the draft starts, because you just automatically assume Lawrence goes number 1, and then you have the pick of Wilson or Fields or whomever at quarterback for that number 2 slot. So I do think that's a real interesting point. Darnold's still got a lot of upside, and like you said, Rob, he's still young. He's still coachable. I do not think that any team coached by Adam Gase gives you a solid foundation as a quarterback to learn, and mono and injuries and stuff in between that kind of didn't help his progression. But I still think there's a hell of a lot of upside there. I was thinking earlier in the season, as a Colts fan, I wouldn't mind taking Darnold, and I think you could see him easily becoming the kind of player that you might have expected of him when he was drafted real high, and there was a lot of expectation of him coming out of college. So I still think there's a lot of excitement there with him, and under the right coach, with the right direction and with a bit more stability, I think he could become a linchpin. And like you say, if they trade away that number 2 pick to somebody that's desperate for, their pick of quarterback, they could easily put the weapons around him that he has not had. And all of a sudden that offense becomes exciting. Salah makes the defense better. I think easily that turns that franchise around in an instant.
If the worst case scenario is Sam Darnold, and the best case scenario is somebody crosses your palm with silver and makes that decision really easy for you, there are coaches going into far worse situations this season.
I think the point around consistency is incredibly valid and something that needs to be held in mind when we're talking about this. We have seen constant coaching changes, constant coordination changes sink so many quarterbacks. We've spent time talking about the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think constant changes for the Jags sunk Blaine Gabbert. It sunk Blake Bortles, and that consistency with Darnold on his second head coach and coordinator combination now, they need to get it right this time. I think keeping that in mind, there is good things and good examples to look at from Darnold's fellow draft mates. Darnold's taken 3rd. First was taken Baker Mayfield. Mayfield has also went through 2 head coach and offensive coordinator combinations before settling this year with Kevin Stefanski. And the Baker Mayfield this year is markedly different from the other Baker Mayfields that we've seen. And part of that is having a coach that will support him. The other consideration is the quarterback taken number 7 that year, Josh Allen.
I think the comparison to Baker Mayfield, I think Josh Allen is in a league of his own. I mean, that guy has arm talent like you wouldn't believe. I think the Baker comparison is better because for all the Kevin Stefanski wizardry, what they gave Baker this year was just a brilliant run game. And you just feel like Darnold, particularly in the red zone, if they had the ability to score on the ground as well as through the air. I mean, if you think about the season just gone, how many times on 3rd down inside the 10 did we see Darnold scrambling left, scrambling right, looking for receivers? I think if you can get smarter in key areas of the field, I think that Darnold at quarterback conundrum could be easily solved.
I do think not having to wheel out 58-year-old Frank Gore every 3rd down is going to help them as well. I think you're bang on with that run game. They've just had absolutely zilch. And there are some exciting ones in the draft. There's a few talented prospects. And like you say, they've got a lot of high picks. So they've almost got their choice of whomever they want.
A lot of free agents as well at running back. I mean, I think there'll be, probably 5 or 6 to choose from that you really feel could be, again, a real step up for a team like New York.
It comes back to culture again as well. And I think, that the ship had sailed almost for Adam Gase with all the issues with Jamal Adams right at the start of the season and going to the Seahawks. And I think that just told you about what the atmosphere in that locker room was like. And I can't remember which one of you guys mentioned it, but you were talking about the guys playing for the man next to them rather than for playing for the coach. So, there's been a big cultural issue there. And I think Salah's the right appointment to come in. He's an animated guy. He's passionate. He cares about what he does. And I think he'll get that team on board. All the people that want to be there and want to play for him will play for him. And all the people that don't, he'll get rid of pretty quickly. I don't think he's going to suffer any fools. So it's an interesting one. I think it's exciting. It's probably, if I was a Jets fan, it's probably the most exciting I would be for the last probably 3, 4, 5 years in terms of what's going to happen with that team. I don't think Darnold is a bad quarterback. And I think actually if you put some stuff around him, I think he'd be successful. However, there's obviously a lot of buzz about them trading for Deshaun Watson and Deshaun Watson wanting to either go to the Jets or the Dolphins. So, that's going to be one to watch. And I think if you put Watson in that environment, he's no better off than he would be at the Texans. I think you still need to put some parts around him. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. I think there's going to be some significant change in terms of the playing roster for the New York Jets for next season. I think that's going to be really interesting and really going to see, the impact that Salah has had on that whole organisation.
Yeah, I think whether it's Darnold, maybe add Crowder, I suppose, on offense that feel like the high points. I mean, a lot of potential on defense. I mean, CJ Mosley was obviously, they absolutely made him one of the richest men in America for a reason, and we've not really seen it yet. But yeah, I can see this being a really exciting turnaround to watch.
Yeah, I think Mosley had a good start to the season, didn't he? Didn't he have a couple of picks in the first game or something like that? And then he was injured for most of the rest of the year. So, I think there's definite, if he can come back in that early season form that he showed in the first game before he got injured, then I think, he is a real bright point for them.
So I think, like the Jags, you've got the chance to bring in some really talented rookies with some good picks, good positions through the rounds. The fact those contracts are cheaper, leaving you cap space to go out and make a splash in the positions where you feel you need. I think a bit like the Jags, in a funny kind of way, there is just a recipe for success there. So I'm going to say, probably no great surprise with the diatribe you've heard, that I'm going to put the New York Jets into the 2021 Club Dub. But now let's go around the room. Aldrin, or what do you think will become of the Jets?
I think you might be right. They're certainly not going to beat the Bills in the AFC East, but for me, the Dolphins have still got questions at quarterback, and ultimately that question could be answered by Deshaun Watson either coming into the Jets or the Dolphins. It seems likely that one of those teams is going to end up with him if he does inevitably get traded. But the Patriots have got problems there, and so I'm with you. I think the Jets could easily be a team that finishes 10-6 or something like that and look well on the way to more success in the future.
It's hard. I think this is the hardest one for me to call. The Texans and the Jags, I think, were absolute no. I can't see it. The Chargers, obviously, I said yes. This is a real tough one. I mean, if you look at their division, the Bills you'd expect to make the playoffs next year. Miami, I think a lot of that is going to depend on, you assume they'll go with Tua as their starting quarterback next year. A lot's going to depend on that. And then who knows what's going to happen with the Patriots, with the Jets. I mean, the Dolphins, there's even talk about them changing their quarterback. The Patriots are going to change their quarterback. The Jets, who knows what's going to happen with their quarterback. So to go from the second worst team in the league to then make the playoffs without significantly overhauling the roster is a real stretch. I don't know. I just don't know if I can see it. I don't know. Flores has got the Dolphins playing well. They play for him. They all talk about how good a coach he is. I think McDermott and the Bills, he's not going to let them slip back. So for me, I think I just can't see it next year. I think they're going to improve a lot. I think, Salah's going to improve them substantially, but I just don't think they're going to improve enough.
So what you're saying there, Phil, is you've very much gone through a head versus heart kind of decision-making process there.
There's no heart involved with this one. There's no Jets aren't in my heart.
I think the Jets will be better. I think they have the opportunity is there for a winning record, but I agree. I think the Bills, I think the Dolphins have probably got a bit too much for them at the moment. What happens with the Patriots? Because a consistently bad Patriots team, I don't think is something that anybody has really considered happening. And we are on the precipice of that.
So it's a 50-50 split, and the Jets, well, they only get my back in Aldrin's. Thank you ever so much for listening, and apologies to Arthur Smith, to the dude Dan Campbell, and for Nick Sirianni. We wish them all luck for the year ahead. Guys, I will join you in a week for the flagship show of the season. It's our Super Bowl preview. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you in a week's time. See you later, guys.
Bye for now.
This is amazing.
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game is over. The game is over.
It's Saleh, not Salah, isn't it? The Jets coach. I'm pretty sure. I'm 99% sure it's pronounced Saleh.
Good job.